Aloha and welcome to this module on usability evaluation. As we're going to see, usability evaluation is a very complicated topic. There are whole courses and textbooks and so forth associated to it, and it can involve the entire development process from very early phases to very late phases. So in this introduction, I'm going to try to give you a little sense for the breadth of it, but then I'm going to focus in on one specific form of usability evaluation called usability testing. And I want to note that there are two terms, user interface and user experience. You'll see those both talked about. The current kind of more popular word is user experience, because user interface tends to focus just on the HTML elements that appear on the screen, or the, doesn't have to be HTML, but whatever it is, fonts and colors and boxes and so forth. And that's important, but it's only important so far as it influences what the user actually experiences as they interact with the product. And so here's an example where the catch-up where you kind of sit it on its cap has a better user experience because you don't have to shake it and so forth, like you do with a regular bottle. User experience, generally, to get that right, involves quite a bit more stuff than simply designing how things are going to be laid out on the screen. You have to understand a lot more about the system and understand a lot more about the user in order to get user experience right. To kind of summarize, the idea is that you've got the stuff that you want the user to enjoy, and the user interface might be the way they're kind of laid out on the plate, but the user experience involves more than just the way it's laid out on the plate. It involves their interaction with the waiter and how much it costs and all sorts of other stuff. Okay, so a good way, you'll see a lot of different things spoken about with respect to usability evaluation, and my kind of one slide summary of things, it goes this way. On the left hand side, we have the stuff that you do before you've actually got a running implementation of the system. And the stuff on the right hand side is the stuff that you can do after you've actually got your system released. Okay, and what that means is that prior to implementation, you've got potential users, and after you've got implementation, you can do usability with the actual users. And then there's also, kind of the top part is to say that, in fact, there's some kinds of usability evaluation you can do without any users at all. Okay. So if we think about the pre-implementation usability evaluation, this is generally thought of as formative evaluation. So that term refers to the idea that we're doing evaluation in order to actually form or design our product or system or service or whatever it is. Whereas in contrast, once we've actually got a running system, we would do summative evaluation. And what that basically means is we're trying to give a grade to the system. We're not intending the evaluation to actually come out necessarily with, how should the system be, but more like, okay, the system's really great or this system isn't good at all. Okay. So on the pre-implementation side, we're going to be dealing with, some kind of mock-up of the system. It won't be an actual running system yet. And so we've got two choices. One choice is to do what's called an expert review, which is you find someone who is an expert somehow with respect to usability, and they apply these, heuristic rules of what constitutes a good design to whatever you give them, and you get their expert opinion on, what should be changed, and that can be good. But that's one person's opinion, and so you have to hopefully find someone who really is an expert, not only with respect to usability, but with respect to your particular domain, so that you get good feedback back. Another thing you can do with mockups is called usability testing. And there you're not relying on experts. Instead, the most important thing is you are finding people who are potential users of your system once it's running, and you're going to take them through kind of a guided process that helps you determine what those users think about your system, at least the way it's reflected in the mockup. Okay, so that's the stuff that happens prior to the final implementation of the system, or at least an initially released version. Once you've got an initially released version of the system, you can do some much more interesting kinds of usability evaluation. You can use eye trackers to see where people are focused on each page and how they move their focus of attention back and forth across components. You can do A/B testing, where you essentially create alternative versions of the same page and then present those alternative versions to users as they visit your site and gather feedback on which version of the page produces better results for you. And finally, you can do field studies where you go out and you do some kind of ethnographic analysis of how users are actually using the system. Okay, so that to me is kind of the the general territory of usability evaluation. You've got these three quadrants. It doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense to have experts over here once you've got a real system. You might as well just find out what the real users have, although I suppose you could do it if you wanted to. Okay, but what we're going to focus on for this little introduction is usability testing. I think that this has it's relatively simple to do. It has a large payoff, and I absolutely think when you're designing systems, it's good to think about development in terms of getting your system development to a point where you can do a productive usability test on it. And there's only about 4 things you have to do. One is you have to implement something. We'll call it a mockup that you can have users look at. You create a plan for how it is that you're going to use these users in order to get good information about the mockup. And then you need to find about 3 to 5 people who really are potential users of this system and have them look at it in this kind of structured way. Once you've done that, you look at what happened when these users were interacting with your system, and you figure out what are the important things you want to change. So let's look at each of these 4 steps in a little more detail. With respect to mockup, there's kind of 2 kinds of mockups. You can go for what I call low fidelity or high fidelity. Low fidelity means you're using a wireframing package, or maybe you're just using colored paper and pens and so forth. So this is very, very early stage kind of design. The advantages are really super simple to build it, but you're creating something that doesn't necessarily look like a real system, and so the kind of feedback you're going to get from your actual users is going to be correspondingly kind of primitive. Not to say it couldn't be very, very helpful, but you're not going to really get at the user experience, for example, because they're dealing with pieces of paper. Another way to go is to to develop a mockup to the point of being kind of high fidelity. And with respect to web applications, what that would mean is actually building with CSS and HTML static pages. So you won't have any back-end database. It won't be interactive. The forms won't actually submit or anything like that. But you will be able to present the user with something that looks and feels like the actual implementation you're heading toward. So that's a little more time consuming to build and change, but if you're good with CSS and HTML, it's not terribly hard to do it. And the great thing is that it actually looks like what you're intending to build, and so you can get pretty good feedback from users because it's going to appear to them like what the real application is, and they're going to interact with it in that same way, and they're going to react to it on an emotional level. In a way similar to what the real application should look like. So you can get some pretty good feedback on both UI and UX from using a high fidelity mockup. Then you have to create a usability test plan, and you see at the bottom of the screen here I've got a link to the page where this was taken from, and I think this is a really good kind of summary of the components of a test plan. But I want to highlight that you want to really think about the objectives of the test plan and what kind of data you want to collect in order to answer what kinds of questions. Um, and then you want to figure out who your participants are, and if you're going to just have a few of them, so you want to think about maybe not only that they are potential users, but that it's a mixture of men and women, or however your demographics you think they're going to be. You might want to try to get a cross section, and then think about what are the actual specific tasks you're going to have the people go through. So the point of the usability test plan is to not simply have someone walk into your office and look over your shoulder while you click through pages, but spend some time in advance thinking about how it is you can structure your interaction with a potential user in the way that creates the most bang for the buck, that you get, you're going to only have them looking at this from maybe 15 to 30 minutes, and how do you get the best quality data from that small amount of time? So once you've constructed that plan, you run the tests, you get your users one at a time, usually, and what I recommend you do if you're using a Mac, have a screen capturing video program like ScreenFlow, where you can actually record the entire interaction. You can hear their comments, you can record their comments, you can see what screens they click through. You're not going to see, like with eye tracking, where they're focused, but that's probably not necessary at this point in time. For Windows, you have other options besides ScreenFlow, so I'm just using ScreenFlow because I happen to use it. Then finally, once you've collected this data or had these interactions with your potential users, you need to analyze the results and try to figure out what are the kinds of things that appeared in multiple sessions or seem to be very, very important in a single session that can help you actually improve your design the most. So you might be wanting to look for places where people took completely erroneous actions, places where they got completely stuck and didn't know where to go. You might want to analyze, did the person actually seem to be engaged, or you can ask them that specifically in order to understand whether you've provided a compelling experience to the user. And if there's some kind of sequence of activities they need to do, depending on the quality of your mockup, you can kind of see if you can actually figure out how long it's taking them to complete that task. So given that, in a relatively short period of time, you should hopefully have identified some significant things you can do to make your implemented product better. Okay, we've got readings at the module page with lots of additional details on this, but I hope this gets you started in a positive direction and excited about doing usability testing.